The PlayStation 2 is always going to be remembered as one of the greatest gaming consoles of all time, if not the greatest, and no console can be anything without a library of excellent games. The PS2's massive catalog of titles covers pretty much every kind of game you can think about, with different genres and structures and what have you, nearly all being represented by all-time classics during the console's lifespan. Here, we're focusing entirely on single-player games, and we will be talking about some of the best of those experiences that we've had on the PS2. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Every PlayStation console has at least one Metal Gear Solid game among its best games. The PS2 has two of them, but of them we felt we had to go with MGS3. In addition to telling a captivating story that still holds a special place in our hearts to this day, Snake Eater expanded upon the series' stealth gameplay in exciting ways by taking us into the jungle. The end result was one of the best stealth games ever made. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The PS2 era was where we saw Grand Theft Auto becoming what we now know it as, and though any one of the three games the series saw on the console could easily claim a place in this list, San Andreas felt like the most obvious choice. GTA as a series has been about ambition for as long as anyone can remember, and from the size of its world to its riveting story to its bombastic sandbox gameplay, San Andreas personifies that ambition better than almost any other game in the series. Burnout 3 Takedown. It was a simpler time when Burnout 3 first came out. You didn't need a massive globe-trotting campaign in your racing games. You didn't need endless customization and post-launch roadmaps. All you needed was excellent races, and Burnout 3 had that in spades. Thanks to an amazing sense of speed, and the way it blended action with driving set the standard for arcade racers, and even today, there's endless fun to be had in Criterion's seminal game. Gran Turismo 3 A-SPEC. If you're not a big fan of arcade racers and are interested in looking for something more methodical and realistic, on the other end of the genre spectrum, we have Gran Turismo 3 and GT3 A-SPEC 2. It was the pinnacle of its particular category when it came out. It polished the series' immaculate driving and simulation mechanics to a sheen, bundling it together with a bevy of content and packaging it all together in a gorgeous, dangerously addictive package. To this day, it remains the best GT game. SSX 3. If you're all about the adrenaline of high-speed racing but would rather do it on the slopes than the roads, SSX 3's got you covered. EA's snowboarding series went from strength to strength in the early 2000s with each new release, and hit its zenith with SSX 3, a game that still hasn't been matched, much less outdone to this day. This is one of those games that has a timeless quality to it, nearly 2 decades on from its launch, and that's the mark of a truly great game. God of War 2. Following up on a series debut as incredible as the original God of War was no easy task, but Sony Santa Monica was more than up to it. With God of War 2, they completely outmatched the first entry in every way possible, and in the process ended up delivering one of the best action games we've ever played, even now. Incredible action, massive set pieces, and a blockbuster story full of brutality and time travel, God of War 2 had all of the elements in place to deliver something special, and that's exactly what it did. Persona 4. Atlus's baffling decision-making process means we're still not entirely sure why Persona 4 first launched on the PS2 in 2008, a couple of years into the PS3's life, but hey, we're not complaining. Because in doing so, the developer ended up delivering an incredible swan song for an incredible system. Persona 5 may have been when the series broke into the mainstream, but as series fans will tell you, its predecessor is just as good, if not better in many ways. Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy. Naughty Dog didn't have nearly as much cachet in the PS2 era as it does now. But even so, the studio was routinely putting out great games for Sony's console. The best of the bunch was probably Jak and Daxter, which may not have had the heavier emphasis on storytelling and gameplay improvements of its sequel, but it still feels like the purest, most distilled form of what that series was all about. Given how different subsequent Jak games feel from its debut though, a lot of that just comes down to personal preference. Final Fantasy XII. While it was controversial upon release, time has been kind to Final Fantasy XII. Its fantasy sci-fi setting, unique combat system, WRPG trappings, and tentative steps into an open world all made it incredibly ahead of its time even at launch, and all presaged the shape and directions for RPGs to come in the years to follow, the last time this would be true of Final Fantasy. While the original PS2 release holds up perfectly well, it's the Zodiac Age re-release on pretty much every system known to man in the decade plus since that really elevated this game's profile, which is all the more reason to never lose sight of the excellent product it already was at launch to begin with. Half-Life. The PS2 is obviously not the system that Half-Life is most commonly associated with, but even so, the series' first game did get ported over to Sony's console sometime after release, allowing yet more people to experience everything it had on offer. The original Half-Life perhaps hasn't aged very well in some aspects, and has been outdone by its own successors and others, but even so, it remains a damn fine game in its own right. OKAMI. It can be argued, perhaps not inaccurately, that the best games the PS2 ever got were released after the HD era was well underway. OKAMI would be among the prime candidates to use as an exhibit whilst making this argument. It was an incredible game, a magnificent Zelda-like by Capcom's Clover Studio, their swan song as it would turn out, blending an unforgettable story with a charming art style, and some of the best game design Capcom has ever put forth to this day. And Capcom fans know that is truly saying something. Capcom would go on to re-release OKAMI on pretty much every single system capable of running it, but the legend got its start here on the PS2. Shadow of the Colossus. A minimalistic open world that emphasizes the Zen concept of white space via vast stretches of emptiness, relying on diegetic in-world cues for navigation and making the intrinsic adventure as important as the extrinsic reward you get for it. Does that sound familiar? We're not talking about Breath of the Wild here, we're talking about Shadow of the Colossus. Fumito Ueda's 2005 masterpiece is arguably his best work yet, blending gameplay and storytelling in a breathtaking package that arguably has not been replicated since, not even by its own subsequent re-releases over the years. It's impossible to overstate Shadow of the Colossus's inherent quality. You just have to play it for yourself to see what we mean. Silent Hill 2. The late 90s and early 2000s were the golden age of survival horror games. The aforementioned RE4 perfected action horror gameplay, but for those who wanted something more palpable, something more cerebral, nothing could and still can't beat Silent Hill 2. Konami's incredible psychological horror romp stands as one of the best stories in gaming to this day, and from its monster design to its atmospheric setting, the game executes on its most crucial ideas in the best way possible. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory's Xbox version is the one that gets all the glory, and rightfully so. It's clearly the superior version. Even so, those who played the game on the PS2 still got an excellent stealth game in every sense. While the developer hasn't handled its stealth series too well over the last decade or so, which is really saying something, in its early years it was flying high, and touched unprecedented heights with Chaos Theory. To call it one of the best games of its genre wouldn't be an exaggeration in the slightest. Resident Evil 4. There's no shortage of people out there who will tell you that Resident Evil 4 is flat out one of the best games ever made. And even nearly 2 decades on from its launch, it's so easy to see the sense in that notion, because it really is incredible. From a pure gameplay perspective, RE4 is the pinnacle of the action horror genre, and though it does veer away from the series' traditional survival horror gameplay, what it does deliver is still masterfully crafted. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time, right here on Gaming Bolt.